Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. So Wendy, Mell, Arthur, and I are, as John said, we're here collaborating together to teach a VC studio this semester. The idea was to bring a practitioner's perspective to conducting the studio. For this talk tonight, we're each going to show a small project our firm's completed and try to keep it concise. It's a pretty day, so I'm sure we'd rather be outside. Arthur and I took the first third of the semester, and there's some observations that came out of that I wanted to pass on to our studio students and the audience. Things that we might have touched on in a cursory way in the studio, but Arthur and I don't do this full time, so it's nice that we come back and talk today and underscore some of these ideas. These are some of the guiding principles for how Andersson-Wise approaches the project, and I hope it's evident in the one we showed to you today. There's 4 principles. First, have a concept. It can be an image or it can be an idea. It can evolve or change over the life of the project. In the end, though, it must become sensory. Architecture is ultimately visual, tactile, etc. Experience through the senses, and it communicates in this way, not with words. Keep it simple and use the concept as a touchstone over the course of the project. 2, draw, and then draw some more. Don't be precious about the design and don't be precious about the drawings you produce. They're means and not ends, and they're to be used as tools. Layer them, use different mediums, multiple points of view, sketches, diagrams, 2D, 3D, perspective, modeling, digital modeling, physical modeling. As you develop the design, use people-oriented views and place yourself in your design. You've got to ask yourself, do you like where you are? And are you sure you like where you are? Okay, the next couple of ideas are built upon a concept Charles Moore liked to use, and that is, bread cast upon the water comes back club sandwiches. Okay, so I want you to think about that image for a moment as we show you what we've got here. Okay, so the third idea, be willing to compromise and change your ideas. Your ideas may not always win and probably shouldn't always win. Stay nimble and flexible. There are many design decisions within a single project, and you can will learn from others' input. Sometimes they're better ideas than your own, and shared ideas feed off one another. The fourth idea, maybe the most important to this, is collaboration, to collaborate. Conceiving, designing, documenting, constructing a piece of architecture is inherently collaborative. Many minds and hands are involved. There needs to be love in the concept, in the drawing, and in the craft of the building, and that's not a single person's work. Embrace the collaboration. It will produce club sandwiches. This collaboration extends into the studio environment. It should occur within the context of your project, the physical context. It should occur with your students and with professors. I'm hoping that tonight collaboration and process is a little bit evident in what we're showing. We're trying to do that rather than just show final work in our project. So talk aside, I'm going to hand it over to Arthur now.
I'm going to try to speak without the mic. Is this mic speaking loudly enough? Is that affirmative, or would you prefer the mic? Let's see if we can advance. Whoops. How do we advance this stuff? Both of them. That one does that. Does anyone know? Support. All right. So, oh, what did that? I just clicked. No, no. Oh, okay. So, this is a map, an aerial map of Austin and environs, and including Lady Bird Lake, Lake Austin, and Travis on up in the upper left-hand side of the screen. The project we're going to show you is a boat dock that is on Lake Austin. And one of the things, I'm sure everybody in the room kind of knows this, but one of the things that we started thinking about when we got this commission was sort of how these lakes were, why these lakes are here. We asked ourselves that. And it turns out that there were many floods over the years, but there was a particularly bad flood in 1935, and that was just before these various dams were built. This is Congress Avenue during that flood. You can see the Capitol in the distance. And this is a construction of Mansfield Dam, which happened between 1937 and 1941. And the area that you see kind of behind the dam there is that big bend of the river that eventually has become Lake Travis. So when you think about how kind of big this all is and how powerful the water obviously is, this is something we started thinking about and talking to our client about. Our client was a person that travels the world and does a number of events all over the world and brings things back. So a very peripatetic individual. He and his wife have seen a number of places, a number of incredible bodies of water, and they were very drawn to Austin. So on the lake, the first notion we had was that while this image looks very kind of geometric and it's a simple box, the idea was that this building would be made out of what almost seemed like the detritus of a flood or a rotting stump, something big and kind of imperfect. And the program for it was 2 boat slips down below. I don't know if you can see that. And upstairs, upstairs there's a bridge that goes to a little arrival spot, and then a kind of a living room, if you will, and of course a bar that's as big as the living room, which is important, and an exterior space. And so one of the things that we do a lot in our work is that the exterior spaces we make, especially in climates like Austin, are kind of as big as the interior space. And what I'm going to walk you through is how this wall and this wall transform to make these rooms all combine as one or separate as distinct rooms. And so here's our boat dock as we approach from the site coming down to it. And you can see that the walls are made of individual pieces of wood that aren't actually fully kind of joined. There's light that comes between them. And as you move in, you can see that this become another, Chris and I, as mentioned, both work with Charles Moore. Another notion that Charles brought to the table was this idea that buildings are, club sandwiches are really repositories of our energy and they're repositories of our memories. And so for Blake and Heather, this was a kind of a memory palace, if you will. This was a place that they could bring back things from their travels. So our work starts with kind of rough sketches. I've got a couple of mine in here that just kind of conceptualize the space, and then they go to ones that aren't really much more refined than the rough ones, but these are the ones that we begin to kind of talk about our notions with the client with. And this sketch talks about how there's a wall here that can all be removed so that this can be not a conditioned space, but a space that is free of bugs, screened-in space, and then an outdoor space, a simple concept like that. And it eventually evolves into the actual construction of the building. Likewise, the bar I mentioned earlier started with an idea that if you sat at the bar and we put a bunch of mirrors here, you would be, depending on how much you had to drink, you would not know if you were looking at the lake or a reflection of the lake. And so they really got into that idea. It eventually you can kind of turn into renderings like this. With details like this and pieces, parts and pieces that were picked up. This is actually a rendering of it. It looks like it would have been done during construction. And the mirror that reflects the hills you see in the distance there. And then, for some reason, I wrote a recipe on this sketch for pinto beans. Chris, this is Merce Whittington's recipe. She was telling it to me on the phone while I was going. It's not essential that you do that, but about this outdoor space. So you can see that in our office anyway, There's a lot of hand drawing, as Chris mentioned. And that's what produces what we're doing. So we then went through a series of studies of what is this fenestration, what is this rotting stump on the lake, and how's that made? And we began doing images. Our first notion was that it was willows. The clients didn't like this. They didn't think it was kind of local enough. We thought it was terrific, but some of the qualities of light and some of the mock-ups. And then we went to a larger format of kind of boards, and Chris swooped in as he normally does and kind of makes something that can actually be built with some kind of drawings he does. And then we did a number of how we construct something like this to make this kind of wall within a frame and have a screen, things like that. And then a number of mock-ups were done. And so I'm showing you all this to kind of just reinforce again what Chris said about the process being a collaborative process. And it's this particular project's interesting, I think, because it's kind of messy. It's not a pure thing. It's something that's kind of more about, these little sticks that we found that we put together. But in a combination, they make for something that's intriguing. We then, these clients had this is some rock doors and things like that from India. We made sure that you didn't see things like light switches and whatnot. We made the designed little covers for those. They brought in a rug and said, we want this on the ceiling. Which we said, okay, well, it's going to rot if it's on the ceiling. So they said, no, we want you to do the ceiling so that it is somehow emblematic of this rug that they found. So we had an artist, local artist here. Are they still in Austin? Red Rider students. They were really good. And they came in, and this is again part of the Red Cast Upon Water Coming Back Club sandwiches. This ceiling became the repository of this kind of human energy. So they went in and literally did the rug on the seam, on the ceiling, and we debated while they were doing this in our office whether everything was being ruined or not. We determined that it wasn't that precious, and kind of it wasn't ruined. It was a kind of exciting way to finish out the project. So I mentioned the gate earlier. These kinds of things, we love big, movable devices in our projects. We know people that make them well, and so the rail on the edge of this boat dock all slides back. This piece right here all slides out to the corner, and the one comes to join it when you want that kind of thing, and it moves back so that people can enjoy an open edge like that for drinking and jumping. And so the whole thing becomes kind of enlivened in that way. And I mentioned the screen before. This is from the lake with the room opened, and then it can all become a big screen in the porch if you want to kind of spend the night down there with no bugs. So a couple more slides just showing what the day's end is for this particular project and this particular memory palace on the lake. Wendy.
I really enjoyed working with Chris and Arthur and Mell on this semester, and it is such an interesting thing that the process of creating the studio is as more collaborative than the sort of work that's happening within. Like whenever you say group project to students, everybody kind of shudders and like pretends like they can't see you and pretends that they can't possibly find anyone in the room that they could collaborate with. And yet the creation of this studio and us just sitting together to figure out how we were going to create a meaningful semester for the students was really interesting, and I think spoke a lot about how we all work, and that there's an idea and you feed off of it and it generates, and it becomes something that has legs of its own. So when we all were talking about how to sort of quickly give some sort of thoughts about our work and some imagery, the idea was let's do something small, and then Mell said let's do something real. I think there was a sort of email exchange about like what can we do in 15 minutes. And so real became the theme, sort of small and real. And then as I started thinking about it, this idea of collaboration, sometimes what you're doing is creating something that has its own voice, but sometimes you're doing something that's quiet, and that your part of the collaboration is actually to sort of help elevate the voices around you, but also to create moments of quiet within that. And actually, this was very much inspired by Michael's comment. He crashed our pinup the other day, and he encouraged the students to make some boring volumes. And I'm like, you know, actually, this project that I'm going to talk about, really the main theme of it was to not mess it up. Because what Larry had gotten started at the beginning of this, with this fantastic house, was so amazing. So this is Torcasa Residence. It's in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Page, led by Larry Speck and a number of other really talented architects, created this project. And this is, I think this photo was taken by Larry as he peeled off the side of the road, and was very much inspired by that hillside. And the house itself really wanted to be almost as quiet as that kind of cut of earth. So this is showing you kind of coming up the road, looking at the long side of this finished house, just trying to give you a little bit of orientation. This next image is taken from the top of that, looking down at a small courtyard. And what you'll see is that it's this sort of long bar that's really set sort of on the hillside and in the hillside, and organized by two kind of main volumes. I came onto the project after part of that language had been created. Our office was collaborating on the interior architecture and design at the time. It was before I rejoined Page, but this big notion, kind of looking through and out, was really, really important. And so, you know, one of the first notions was there's this beautiful hillside. There's this fantastic long bar of a building. There are these absolutely beautiful, sort of conceived, the idea of these, you know, sort of volumes of rammed earth. And really, you almost want nothing on the inside to interrupt what's happening with that architecture. The other interesting thing was that we had a client who had this unbelievable faith in the team. But they also had some very particular things they brought with them. So the first person on this project was the lighting designer. And the lighting designer had been selected because they had an art collection that was incredibly important to them. And they also had some furnishings that they were really invested in that were, what I would say, incredibly present kinds of things. And so the first person on the project was a lighting designer, to make sure that each item was perfectly lit and celebrated in this new home. But they came from Dallas and they're moving to Santa Fe. And I don't know if you can kind of connect those dots, but sometimes the things in one place that's quite urban don't necessarily translate to that other landscape. So the other part of what we were doing was, one, not messing up the architecture, but the other was to help kind of knit together this life that this couple had in Dallas, and their art and their baggage and all of their kind of investment there, with this really beautiful home on the hillside of Santa Fe. And so that was this interesting kind of collaboration that we had with the architecture and with the client who wanted to give us this really strong voice in the rest of their life in this home, but also had a lot of things that they were really bringing with them. So these are just some quick three-dimensional studies, and early on the house was kind of organized. The rammed earth volumes were there, but there were these other kind of volumes that were also helping to kind of subdivide that space. And then in the midst of that, there was a thought that maybe those weren't sort of simple riff-cut oak volumes, but maybe there was something else. And then there was this kind of looking back at, if they were art, well, what else would they be informed by? And so that became the next kind of major collaboration on the project. was with Marco Chewier, fantastic artist, with Mark Machek, with Larry, with myself and our teams, of thinking about if those volumes weren't these super quiet volumes, if they actually become a real focal point for the house, what are the things that would inform them? And these kind of pieces of the landscape were what began to inform the sort of basic color of these fantastic art volumes, just to reorient you a bit. And then that's what they became. They were art, architecture, they sort of define that space. They are these sort of layers of really perfectly finished and organized MDF panels, the steel fireplace and structure within. They actually have air and storage on some sides. Margot's amazing dichroic paints, which just have a life of their own. And so they became the sort of very vocal part of the house. And again, our job then, in sort of working with these volumes, was figuring out, again, how to be quiet and what does that mean. They also can kind of create this dialogue between inside and outside. This is an example of one of those pieces that the owner brought with them, this Papasan chair, which had its own kind of sculptural identity, and these little sort of bronze table that was just one of his favorite things. And then as we're thinking about how do you inhabit the rest of the room, the thought was, well, again, what are the right pieces to not bring too much of a voice to that? And also, how can you walk through and look through that house and look all the way through it and have the rest of the pieces of that almost be like air? And so in sort of working with those pieces, we really wanted to honor how much the owner really loved these pieces of very heavy but light looking bronze. The volumes that were being introduced in the house through the art walls, and then this just amazing view outside. And so part of that was creating these very sort of supple, luscious furniture groupings, but the other was introducing some other elements. This is a little suite of tables that we worked on with Mark Machek, and Hawkeye did these beautiful little folded bronze pieces. And again, it was this idea of how to be really, really quiet and light, but also really connect to what was happening architecturally. One of the things that we decided to be sort of was inspiring about the house is this idea of volume. And if you think about the language of sort of clean, light, minimal architecture, a lot of times you think of thin lines and maybe sort of machined connections. For us, the project was really about kind of concealing fasteners and really celebrating the volume as the quiet piece. Starts with those wonderful rammed earth volumes and the art volumes, and then sort of moving on from there. So we really tried to treat these as a kind of seamless, thin line with pieces of a kind of volumetric table within. And so we have this suite here and this little table to the side of it that we really happy how they collaborate with the other pieces of the architecture. The next thing is this kind of funny lamp, which simple, it's just a really beautiful piece of molded wood veneer. It's called the air lamp though, and when we got it in our office, we like sat it down, we all just wanted to like gaze at it. It was so pretty and sculptural. And then it was just too light and flimsy and it fell over. And that was really unsatisfying. And so we decided to take matters into our own hands, and sort of this is, again, sort of thinking about how much you can pay attention to something. This is how that little light socket came in the original design. And we were like, you know, this is so beautiful, and it's so much about this beautiful sort of pure knot, and then you've got this like really dingy socket attached to it. And so we're like, all right, well, if we took a toilet paper holder and we peeled it apart and we kind of deconstructed what that shape is and reconstructed it, and then if we had somebody mill that out of metal and then we reattached it, wow, it's so much better. And so in the end, that's a much more satisfying thing to see in this space and a much more quiet connection than the original. And again, that level of energy just helped it be sort of more quiet and pure within the space. This photo I really love because it was taken by the owner, who regularly sends us photographs of his house with animals and plants and snow and rain and just any number of things that enchant him about the place. And then this sort of shows, again, you know, how all of those pieces, his kind of past life and his new art inspiration and things that are quiet can kind of work together. This one really shows that story of the sort of weed and vegetation. So gray dichroic paint that Margot works with and how those begin to change. And also how creating a concert of the pieces that came from his original collection and his new collection and these volumes of the space all can kind of work together. The next sort of couple of minutes, we'll talk about just other kind of elements and details within the space that support that idea of quiet. This is how we did a little bit of a reconfiguration in one of the Randolph volumes so that it could be occupied on that end. We have this incredibly fastidious client who really wanted a place where he could like change batteries and wrap paper and not make a mess anywhere in the house. And so we just created this little detailed moment within that so that he can kind of shut the door and celebrate each of those materials individually. We did some reconfiguration, also sort of looking at from early ideas. There was this sort of series of rooms that when we got down to it, they had a room full of tchotchkes, but not really. Really beautiful small bits of art that there was nowhere else for in the house, and they loved them and they cared about them, but they also didn't want them anywhere else in the house. And they wanted a place where they could go and sort of celebrate and enjoy those pieces without them taking over this sort of new world. And so again, this actually has a kind of media security closet. This has a Wii behind it. But mostly it's about these little moments to sort of celebrate this little collection that they had. And then there was this red lacquer box and this sort of rug and the idea of, well, how would you know, what's the new piece that needs to go into that room? So this is another piece that we worked on with Mark, which was really about sort of the lacquer table, if you will, and a place to kind of occupy that room. Again, just looking at some of those other details and how the volumes really play out to celebrate what's beyond. Similarly, in the art collection, we had to hold it off the wall so that this light feature that the lighting consultant obsessed over, this sort of like 60-foot long light trough, wouldn't create weird shadows with the art. So we fashioned a sort of 3-inch spacer to the wall, so all of that worked out. And again, sort of obsessing on the quiet, all of those little details kind of working together to really celebrate the surfaces of the architecture. This bed came to us looking a bit like a Liberace fantasy, sort of opulent plum velvet that like extended beyond or would have if we hadn't kind of tidied it up. And then really connected that piece of Dallas with the landscape beyond through this fantastic Rodarte design drape. And working through in his suite, he really loved bronze. This is the heaviest, tiniest desk you will ever see. And this is a piece that we worked on with Mark, that he beautifully built. And one of those details, again, to obsess on was this leather pull, which we just really wanted to be very satisfying when you open that sort of weighty drawer. And so Mark sends these different ways of connecting that. And while there's something kind of satisfying and tectonic about this one, in the end, kind of quiet one out, because you really wanted to notice and feel that leather before you notice the connection. And in the end, it extends to sort of every part of the house for us, and making sure that the thin line of this whole space was really celebrated, even in the exterior furnishings. Paola Lenti is this fantastic Italian designer, and she these are these really thin ribbons of steel that she covers, and just really allowed the eye not to get trapped by the sort of furniture of that space. So in the end, it's a lot of pieces that work in concert together. I think when we collaborate, and these for us were about how to be quiet and not mess up the architecture. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mell, and I'm going to show you just the wet on the keyboard. Oh, there it is. This is the black slide between our presentations. What's that?
It's a palette cleanser.
Palette cleanser. I just want to say, you know what Chris was saying about he and Arthur's firm, and there were like 4 things that they talked about. Those are so important, and they did a great job of describing them. That's just, if this thing is really being videotaped, go back and just watch that a bunch of times. I think I will, because those were unbelievably spot on. And you know, Wendy's discussion of the collaboration, that is spot on too, and maybe I can relate some of that stuff to this project I'm going to show you. And we did work well together. I guess we're like the pieces of bread out of the water doing this club sandwich piece in the studio. Oops. I'm going to jump right into this project, but this, I'll tell you what it was. It was a restroom, and it was also a waterfront project, so we had to deal with the lake, but in a different way. This is a project for the Trail Foundation. They're an organization in town that raises money and then finds projects to do to enhance the trail system, specifically around Lady Bird Lake. And their latest project was a restroom that was to replace a restroom that was right here. This is the Lamar Bridge, and this is Austin High down here, so it's in this little stretch. There, and the old one was a sort of a pod that had been dropped off in the 60s and was leaning. And but essentially the function was the same. It needed to have a toilet and a sink. That's what we were charged with. And you know, I'm thinking at the beginning when you get this project, I'm thinking, okay, how, you know, we can do that. We can handle the sink and the toilet, but how do you make this more of a place you're drawn to? You know, that you, like Chris said, you know, how do you feel when you're here? How do you feel when you first see it, when you arrive, when you experience it, when you leave? It's all experiential, especially in a park. One of the things when we did the site analysis that we noticed was that the Barton Creek lets out right across from this, and there's a little gazebo right here. And so you have this view. If you could just clear out a little bit of the hedgerow at the edge, you could see through it and see all the activity coming and going from the lake from the site. And the other thing was this line matched, if you just tweaked it a little more, it matched the summer and winter solstice. So in the end, they gave us 2 bathrooms to design. So we pulled it apart in a little, it's a little dog run that was bent along this axis. And then we cleared out the shrubs down there by the lake, which we didn't know whether that was going to happen until the end. You ask for things, and you don't know whether the Parks Department's going to do it, because they're just one entity, and there's a lot of entities, Austin Energy, and any project. The big collaboration grows to people you have no control of, and you're just wishing and hoping. One of the other programmatic functions of building in a park is it has to be incredibly indestructible and durable. And you have to think materials and methods of construction that can withstand, in this case, floods and wind, and mostly people doing, you know, trying to take it down. So everything, even the door, the sink, the toilets are unbelievably expensive because people flush unspeakable things down the toilet, and you can buy a car with what these 2 toilets cost. This was an early sketch demonstrating sort of how we had this plan here. I don't know if you can see it. We had this long concrete bench that wrapped around, and a sink and a toilet and a big place for a bicycle. And we thought you could lay down and rest and change your baby or something. That was really, they didn't like that at all. They were saying other things would happen. We were arguing that, well, if I'm going here, I don't want to see it, you know. So but then the concrete, a little bed thing got shrunk back to a little tuffet in the end. But this is a closer picture. Tried a lot of ideas. We iterated like crazy, thought of all kinds of wild things to do. In the end, we made these 2 pup tents out of steel and arranged them in a little fun place with all these openings that would allow ventilation, which was one of the requirements, and there was a whole issue about safety. This was the very technical drawing that they built it from, but it had these 2 bulkheads that were concrete, and then the rest was a big steel wrapper, and Chuck's in here. I should get Chuck up here, because Chuck, talk about collaboration. Chuck's, you know Chuck Nave, the engineer? He's a great engineer, and we met 1,000 million times, and I was pushing him about cantilevers, and I don't care if it deflects, I just wanted to hang out this far, and it didn't happen. Chuck would be very calm and go, well, it can't be done, and he'd do it. But he made it happen. This is just an early sketch. This was an example of like a million things we did, but I was already looking at sections and this wacky shape that it was not practical. But when you're going through and designing things, a lot of times you just have to, like, you might be excited about part of it, but the rest of it you think, it's just not working, so you got to throw it out and move on. That's the iterative thing. And this is the first sketch where we started thinking about steel with this concrete base. And this was a much closer thing. You kind of went in this little opening and there was holes in the back. But that was like, the thing wrong with this was that it was not safe. And people could get in there and jump out at you. When we're working sketches, this was just a grid pad where I was working out some detail that we didn't use. And then there was a trace paper overlay, so I put those together too, just to show you how we work along the way. This is the kind of stuff I bring in and talk to Chuck about. I don't know what that is. But this was an early rendering to get approved with the Parks Department. They were sort of the overseers over here, because the Foundation just does these things, and then they had set it all up and then they give it to the Parks Department. And the Parks Department is still involved as a collaborator. They have concerns about maintenance and where the trash is going to be picked up and all the security things. We lifted the steel up off the ground so that if you're inside, you could see if someone was lurking outside, but it would be too low for someone to get down. It'd be obvious if they were sneaking a peek or something. So most of the openings were high. They just went round and round. I'll get right into construction. The concrete bulkheads were to create shear in this opposite direction because we had this flimsy steel container. And originally I wanted the steel to just be plate steel, nothing but plate, and it was like it worked in the museum board model. Why can't it work in reality? And it was getting thicker and thicker and thicker. I think Chuck said maybe if it's 3 inches thick or something. I don't know what it was. But we ended up having to put this frame in here to hold it, and we had to deal with the realities of like Newtonian physics and stuff like that. And it was hard for me to, put all that stuff in there because I just wanted the pure steel. But things like that happen. A million things happen. This little thing, it looks like, if you look at the other side, there's a little hole for a little rectangle for the toilet paper, and it became this huge construct because the laws changed about accessibility, and you no longer could deal with just a rail to get yourself up and down on the toilet. You had to have something to push against. And the law didn't anticipate sloping walls. So we went round and round, and we ended up with this thing. It looks like Santa Claus, if you could hang a stocking on it. And it's just got toilet paper in it. But it was all right. We could control the proportion and things like that. This is a big crane. We worked with Sarabi Studio, a steel place in town, and they were awesome. They were like, they sort of took over as the GC, frankly, and it made everything work. They had these huge, heavy plates of steel that they had to lift and set in place. They had ground down the edges to match, and it's amazing it came together like this. We wanted to use this plate steel so it could just, I think this guy's about to move, so if he jumps, well, maybe it's the next one. But, we have some great movies of this, but there's not enough time. But they lifted these things, and it was wild. I was glad I caught, was out there every once in a while. This is an example of what happens in a field. You ask for a circle to be poured in concrete. It ends up being this sort of amoeba kind of concrete kind of thing. And so then you're thinking, well, this looks awful. So Payam Sarabi ground that out, and then we designed a plate to drop on it. And now you don't know that the drain is really whack. But you run into things like that all the time. In construction, you just have to deal with it. It's another collaborative thing where everybody gets together and decides how to solve the problem. And this is what it's like to be in there. This is what's left of the concrete bench, the lights leaking in all around to show off the sort of the way everything was constructed. These doors are big and heavy, kind of like a vault. It was sort of, it wasn't really that the place wasn't going to be secure, but I was going back to Chris's comment about all the senses are at play. They are all at play, and out there you don't have auditory privacy, but you have this, for security, if you could have this big door that, you know, it banged when you closed it, and threw this big lever, you made this ridiculously large locking mechanism so you felt like you were safe, whether you were or not. And then these views up, and you know, when you're reclining in the bathroom, you can look up and venting space. But we just tried to get the spaces and the gaps between to be proportionally right, and so as you moved around in the space, everything would keep moving, the figure ground nature right. In different times of day, it would illuminate different parts. It looks different every time you go in there. I just happen to be here and the light's catching the thin edge right there, and you know what, 5 minutes later it wouldn't be doing that. This was more fun with, we were going to design a custom set of men, women, accessible, transgender, all this stuff, things, but they didn't like it, so it just went away. And so that happens too. You just go, okay, well, whatever. And the regular guy's going to. There used to be a normal person here, but it's probably in somebody's house now. And then in the last minute, they were like, those things didn't come in for the Braille, so we'll just make these cheap things and stick them up here. That happens too. I'm just trying to show you what it's like out there. You just try to make the best of it. This is funny, but this is Chuck. I'm sure he remembers this. This was a. You know, you can draw things on paper, but then when you think about how are they going to build this, what goes first? How do they get this piece in here? Sometimes you can draw things that look great but are impossible to build, and which is I can be accused of it. But Chuck Bales made these things work. This is some of the purlins sticking out to hold the steel, and this is sort of the cantilever. You know, I keep pushing it how far before it fails. None of it's fatal. For locks, we just pulled it, you know, we were trying to keep the material palette simple and the solution simple. We just made a bigger hole for this standard lock mechanism and flushed it out, and it was great. This little, after we opened, they said that the door, they were afraid the door opened too wide and it would fall off or something. Whatever. So we just had this stainless hose stuck in there after going through all kinds of elaborate schemes with pulleys and things that take up damper, you know, force and stuff. We ended up just sticking this in the ground so it wouldn't trip anybody, and when the shallow part of the door hits it, it can't go any further. You can also use it for as a tool for bending the door if you were really mighty enough. This is another place where the Parks Department collaborated with us. They told us that no tree could touch this structure, and then we shoved it into the trees anyway. And then we knew they would neglect their own projects. They didn't come out and look. So it stayed that the whole time. They kept saying, you got to cut it, you got to cut it. But we were all saying, we're never going to cut that. They can cut it if they want. And they didn't, so now it's great. It grows right through as it should. So you just got to look for the opportunities when you're doing things like this. There's the sink over here. This pole has a slot behind it and some LED lights in it. If they ever put electricity in, that's a whole story without time to say. And then the TTF thought people wouldn't understand how to use toilet paper and stuff, so they put these signs. They just pasted them in there. It drives me crazy. Things like that happens. You just have to deal with that too. Or you have to wait to get a sharp knife and go remove them somehow. This is a detail of how well that thing came out. It actually ended up being something nicer than what we had originally planned, and that can happen a lot too. you just never know. You just gotta keep working it and iterating it and get everybody involved. You know, Chuck helped us detail out all this stuff and figure out how things were attached in nice, simple ways. There's another view of it. The door from the other side. This threshold is a little piece of marble, but again, it makes a difference. You know, it could have been concrete, it could have been steel, but we chose to do the standard old-fashioned marble with a little rounded top, because some people will notice it, and over time it'll get worn from foot traffic. Even though it's hard, it'll have a saddle in it in 30 years, and that'll tell a story of its own, which concrete wouldn't. Or you can go carve initials in it. And then just, I wanted the two buildings to be in the same family but have different personalities. So we messed around with the shapes and the roof shapes, and the way they would catch light and not catch light, and change to the day. They're big sun catchers, really. But they do have different personalities as you walk around. But they were close enough together, almost like that Seinfeld character is too close to your face. But you do feel safe when you're in there. I mean, you do feel this. Yeah, you feel the enclosure, even though it's open to the sky. And they just sit in the meadow like this. This is the facade that faces the street with all the busy traffic is stayed in billboard-like, in a big scale, more of a civic scale. And the panels are just kind of oxidized, like obviously these came from a different run or a different plant. The other funny thing, it had a bunch of writing on the face that came from the manufacturer like this. And right at the top it said "Made in Russia." And one day we were out there and all of a sudden it was gone. Somebody had scrubbed it out. So and it was right when Putin was like causing hell everywhere. So it got active and de-Russianized them. But when you order materials, you don't know where it's going to come from these days. And these are just people hanging out. And that's it.